Welcome to Squat Talks. Tonight we're going to talk about why is it that I can't train as hard as I could when I first started lifting. And while we talk about that and while we try to answer that question, you're going to be watching me squat with chains, and then after I squat with chains, I work up to a heavy single with chains, and then I do some wide stance squatting with the safety squat bar, and then I finish that up with some ab work. The chain work that I'm doing here, I'm using 3 sets of chains from Elite FTS, Dave Tate's company. In each of those are about 40 pounds each, and then I'm also using some 3/8 inch toe chain that I just bought at like a local Home Depot and had cut into strips, and I put that on the setup as well. So total at the top, it's about 100. I think it's about 140 pounds of chain total. So at the top with 295 that I work up to, it's about, was it 435? I think about 435 at the top and 295 at the bottom. And that's a pretty good single for me. I haven't worked up to much with the chains in a long time, so I'm pretty happy with that effort. So tonight we're trying to answer the question, why is it that I can't train as hard as I used to in the gym, especially if you are an intermediate or advanced lifter. And when I say intermediate or advanced lifter, I mean somebody who's been training for 5+ years and has worked up to some pretty respectable weights. The weights that I'm using these days aren't necessarily so impressive, but I'm trying to build back up into them. But and age becomes a bit of a component, a factor into this as well. But let's put the age aside for now and just talk a little bit about that trainability and experience thing. If you are somebody who's new to training, you'll find that once you get over that initial soreness and once you develop some skill with the barbell lifts, that you can train pretty hard and you can train pretty frequently, and it doesn't tend to wreck you as much as you might think. However, if you are someone who is pretty experienced, if you're an intermediate or advanced lifter, you're not able to train that hard. You just can't do that. You can't train hard, you can't train every day. You can train hard, but you can't train hard every day. It's not as sustainable for somebody who's an intermediate or advanced lifter. And that seems to it seems to go against what would normally sound like common sense, that if you're more trained that you should be able to train more. But that's not necessarily the way it works, and it certainly isn't the way it works with strength training. With skill training, that might be true, but with strength training, when we're trying to maximize our strength, it doesn't always work out that way, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. When you are untrained and you are pushing weights that are close to your 100%, your 1 rep max, for example, your 1 rep max, your 100%, is not really 100% because there's still skill that needs to be developed, and the muscles haven't learned to really exert as much strength as they can either. So there is this thing called the muscle strength deficit, and the muscle strength deficit is the difference between what your muscles can do at will versus what your muscles can do when hooked up to electric stimulation. And in a beginning lifter, the difference between what you can exert just by choice versus what you can do involuntarily by electrostimulation, the difference between those two things when you are a newbie is quite large. When you are an advanced lifter, the difference between what you can do at will, what you choose to do, what you do in the weight room, and the amount of strength that can be exerted under electric stimulation, the difference between those is much less because you are highly trained. What does that mean? Well, that means that if you are strong and if you are experienced, then when you are pushing the limits of your strength, you're really pushing the limits. When you put the pedal to the metal, you're really stressing the engine a great deal. Whereas if you are a noob, your 100% is not really stressing your capabilities as much as you might think. So, for example, if I give this example, if I'm a, let's pretend like I'm a really advanced lifter who squats 800 pounds. If I do repeat efforts of 90%, and I'm an 800 pound lifter, that means that I'm going to be lifting 720 pounds for singles. That's going to put a huge strain on the system. On the other hand, if I'm a 400 pound squatter, and if I'm lifting 90% loads, that would be 360 pounds for repeat singles, I'm not stressing the system nearly as much. Now you might think, well, the difference is load or volume. Well, it's not just a load and volume issue. Even if I'm a 400 pound squatter and if I do, let's say, 3 singles with 360, that's not going to equal the amount of systemic stress that the 800 pound squatter has put on his system, squatting 720 pounds. It's just not going to be the same amount of stress. So what does that mean for your training? Well, if you're a noob, you can train hard, you can train often, you can push it as hard as you can fairly frequently, and you can get away with it. If you are an experienced lifter, and if you're pushing the pedal to the metal, you need to back off afterwards. You need to make sure that you get extra recovery. And if you don't, it could lead to bad things down the road. So that's why, for example, when athletes are peaking, they need to be extra careful about the effort that they're putting in. It's difficult because when you are having good training sessions, especially when you are experienced lifter, when you start to have a good wave of training and things start to go well, you start pushing the weights, there's a tendency to just kind of keep going with that. But it's important, I think, for experienced lifters to remember that when you have good sessions and when you have heavy sessions, that's the time that you really need to be careful about backing off and getting more rest. Why? Because you need it more than the beginning lifter. Okay, so that's all I have to say on that topic. If you have questions or comments that have to do with muscle strength deficit or trainability or the difference between a noob training and a more experienced lifter, please feel free to put those in the comments and like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Squat Talks.